Activity Analysis of Washing a Car by Taylor Kenny and Josh Oliver. For our activity analysis, we're going to break down how you wash a vehicle, specifically at a self-serve car wash.
To begin this activity, you first need a vehicle and you need to locate a self-service car wash near you.
In some type of currency. Typically, at self-service car wash stations, spray wands are included, but most stations require you to use quarters to access their machines.
For our activity, we chose to bring dollar bills and exchange them for quarters.
In looking at why it is important to wash your vehicle, it's a sign of pride in that you're proud of what you have, and also, as expensive as vehicles are, it prolongs their life. The space demands for this activity include a built environment. The major structures of this are the building, specifically the car wash bay, in which you drive in and complete the activity. Furthermore, about space demands, it's important that whenever you pull into the car wash bay, that your vehicle is as centered as you can get it, and you are using the wand appropriately, which typically means about 8 inches away from the vehicle.
Damage can occur if you place the wand too close to the vehicle.
For lighting, most car wash stations provide some type of lighting, so you're not limited to daylight hours for completing this task. A few things to be aware of when you're using these car wash stations specifically is the noise level when you're using the pressurized water. When it hits the vehicle, it can create an echo in the bay, which could be a problem for someone who is sensitive to this. Furthermore, it gets pretty humid in there, and the smell of soap can be pretty strong as there's not a whole lot of room to move around. Now we're going to take a look at the social demands of this activity. Typically, it's done as an independent task. There's usually only one water nozzle, and there's not a whole lot of room for multiple people to work. Considering the car wash station is a public place, there are some rules that we should be aware of when doing this. Specifically, what time you're completing this. If this is going to be a busy time of the day, or suppose a hot summer day, it's going to be important that you're aware that waiting time may be included in this, and you should allow for some extra time.
It's important to note that typically a bucket and wash mitt is not needed for this activity, since self-serve wash bays are normally a quick process.
Scrubbing the vehicle and kind of taking care of the extra things is something that should be done not at the public space, and specifically not during a busy time of the day. As I touched on briefly in another slide, it's important to look at the cultural and symbolic aspects of this activity. Typically, cleanliness and shine are something that people want to strive for. This includes their vehicle as well. Cleanliness and purity kind of go hand in hand, and appearances often affect how we view others and how others view us. Unlike some activities, washing your vehicle is one that needs to be completed for the most part in a certain order. So we're going to take a look at this order for washing your vehicle in a car wash bay. First, we're going to drive to the car wash bay and pull into the first available bay.
Make sure your windows are closed and you exit the vehicle.
Next, we're going to go to the bill changer if you didn't bring quarters, and insert quarters into the acceptor and wash control panel.
Next, we're going to grab and remove the wash wand from the holder.
And choose your soap. Squeeze the trigger for pressure and begin waving the wand from top to bottom across the whole vehicle as you make your way around. Once the wash times out, release the trigger and hold the wand.
Insert 6 more quarters to initiate the second wash. Select rinse.
Continue waving the wand from top to the bottom as you make your way around. Once it times out, as long as you are pleased with the wash of your vehicle, you can return the wand to the holder, enter your vehicle, and safely pull out of the wash station, and you have successfully washed your car. As I previously mentioned, there's not a whole lot of flexibility in completing this task. For example, it's important to enter your money into the coin exchange before you can expect water to come out of the nozzle.
Also, it's important to make sure that your windows are closed and rolled up in your vehicle before initiating the wash.
When looking at when this task is completed, it's a lot of personal preference in kind of what everyone's schedule is, the time of year, and where we live. Someone who lives in, say, Michigan might have to work around a snow schedule, whereas someone in California probably isn't going to have that issue to work around. Another thing to consider is most car wash stations are open 24 hours, and they provide pretty good lighting, so people that work various schedules can still use the stations. When we're looking at what kind of motor abilities and skills that we would need, it's important that we have dynamic and static stand balance, grip, fine motor skills and strength, gross motor skills and strength, shoulder flexion extension, horizontal adduction and abduction, elbow flexion extension, wrist flexion extension, as well as ulnar and radial deviation, some cervical range of motion, the ability to weight shift, and good activity tolerance or endurance.
As far as sensory input is concerned, we have to be aware of the smell of the soap,
the feel of the vibration from the wand when we're squeezing for the water to come out,
the temperature of the wash bay, especially in wintertime,
the temperature of the water, and the loud sound of pressurized water hitting the vehicle. Some of the tasks that will require visual perceptual skills include grabbing the water hose from the holder, as well as returning it, and accurately spraying water on the vehicle in the appropriate places, as well as placing coins and dollars in the money slots. Some of these activities require gross motor and some of them require fine motor, but visual perception is important for all of these tasks. Some more skills and abilities that we should be aware of, specifically from a cognitive standpoint, would be awareness of appropriate time to wash the car. For example, this would include not doing it when it's raining. It's also important to be aware of how much money you need to bring, the sequence of completing the task, awareness of time limitations, rolling your windows up, and problem solving if something isn't right.
An example of this could be waiting in line until a wash bay opens, or troubleshooting if quarters are not being accepted into the machine.
From a social-emotional perspective, having a clean vehicle creates a sense of self-satisfaction. We're able to take pride in a clean vehicle, and awareness of completing the task in an appropriate amount of time, specifically if there's a long line of people waiting for a car wash bay. Communication skills for this task are something that's very important and may be limiting for some people. Most of the time, there's not an attendant there at all hours of the day. As we mentioned, these stations are typically open 24 hours a day. So it's important that someone who's going to use these stations has the ability to follow automated prompts as well as read signs. In this chart, you can take a look at what kind of motions are required for this, range of motion degrees that would be needed, the muscles that we're going to use to complete each of these tasks, how gravity plays a role in this, what kind of strength is required, and the type of muscle contraction that's going to be completed.
It is important to take note of these specific motions used during this activity, as it can help guide you in formulating a plan with a person who has a disability.
As with any activity, it's important to be aware of the safety precautions and contraindications to completing a task. Things to consider include sensitivity to temperature. This could be cold water or humidity in the wash bay. This activity also requires a lot of activity tolerance. Someone who has some type of exertional restriction, this might not be a good task for them to complete. The water hose is a tripping hazard for someone with a lack of safety awareness or who may be considered a big fall risk. There's limited room to move around within the wash bay, especially if you have a bigger vehicle. Range of motion and lifting restrictions, such as sternal precautions, would also be contraindicated for this activity, as it requires a lot of heavy lifting and overhead movements.
As we mentioned before, there's limited flexibility with this activity. Things to consider are that there's only one hose for the pressurized water, therefore only one person can be washing the vehicle. Also, typically wash mitts and wash buckets are not appropriate to use. An example of an adaptation could be
someone who has low activity tolerance. There could be a second person available to take over if a break is needed. However, you should be aware that there's no seating provided, and opening up the car door while water is running is not a good idea.
Another way we could adapt this activity is washing the vehicle at home. This way, rest breaks could occur and there would be less time constraints on the person washing the vehicle. Some precautions to consider would be somebody who has undergone open heart surgery who now has sternal precautions may be contraindicated to complete the car wash task. Sternal precautions do not allow the individual to lift his or her arms overhead, which is required for the task to reach all parts of the vehicle. Sternal precautions also include lifting restriction greater than 5 pounds. At times, heart surgery also comes with restrictions, as washing a vehicle requires good activity tolerance and increased exertion. Many rest breaks may be needed for keeping exertion at a minimum. A person who has undergone rotator cuff surgery would demonstrate difficulty completing this task as they have limited available range of motion in the extremity the procedure was completed on. Spinal precautions include no bending, lifting, or twisting, and this activity requires engagement of each of these restrictions. When considering the lower extremity, hip replacement surgery demands the person does not rotate the hip. While this task could be completed with hip precautions, it would require increased time to complete the task with good awareness of movements as to not break any of the precautions.
Now we're going to look at 2 ways we can kind of grade this activity down or adjust it for someone who might have difficulty. For example, someone with anxiety may feel rushed to complete the task if there were a long line of cars. In this case, we could suggest that a person could choose a lower traffic time to complete it, for example, early in the morning or later in the evening, where they may feel less anxious if there were not so long of a line of cars. Another way that we can grade this activity is for someone who has low activity tolerance, and this task would require more tolerance than what the person can produce. We could suggest that that person bring someone else to relieve them whenever they need a break. If the typical way of completing this task proved too easy, or we wanted to challenge somebody, we could grade the activity up. One way of doing this, for example, would be somebody in a work hardening program. This could be a person returning to work after an injury and they need to work in the heat. This person could complete the task midday in the summer to expose him or herself to warm and humid conditions to prepare for returning to work. Another way this activity could be completed would be through no rest breaks. The task can be done with no rest breaks and no accommodations given, such as bringing a stool to sit on. In considering the OT theory and practice models, we think that a model that would be appropriate to use with this activity would be occupational adaptation. This model allows the client to use compensatory or adaptive techniques to complete an occupation of their choice. One of the biggest parts of occupational therapy is inclusion and engaging in occupations of someone's choice, which includes adapting their environment or the person to make them able to engage in these tasks with any type of modifications that may be needed.
We also felt that it was important to note that occupational adaptation allows the client to use any resources needed to adapt the task to their abilities. This includes trial and error to see what works for them, as well as identifying what specific part of the task needs to be modified in order to complete the task in the least restrictive environment.
We hope that you've enjoyed our analysis of washing a car and you have learned the value and the role occupational therapy can play in day-to-day tasks. This includes learning how to adapt and modify tasks and what body structures and functions are necessary to complete this activity.
Thank you all for watching.